As we consider Catherine's public image versus her private struggles, we see the stark divide between perception and reality. To the world, she was unbreakable. In reality, she endured a loss that should have been acknowledged, grieved, and perhaps even honored. The miscarriage reveals the cost of perfection, the cruelty of silence, and the resilience of a woman forced to live two lives: the flawless princess and the grieving mother. The truth, now revealed, reshapes the way we see her, not as an untouchable figure, but as a woman who bore immense pain beneath the weight of a crown. The revelation that Catherine suffered a miscarriage did not first surface in the gossip pages of tabloids or in whispers from discontented palace staff. It came from someone whose voice carried undeniable weight: a doctor. For years, speculation swirled around the Princess of Wales' health. Each time she appeared in public looking tired, slimmer, or more subdued than usual, the rumor mills churned. Some chalked it up to the pressure of her role, others to exhaustion from balancing motherhood with royal duty. But none outside her closest circle knew the truth. The confirmation from a medical professional changed everything. It was no longer speculation or rumor. It was fact. And that fact pulled back the curtain on one of the monarchy's most closely guarded secrets. The doctor's revelation brought clarity to a timeline that had puzzled observers for years. There were moments when Catherine disappeared from the public eye with little explanation, and the palace attributed it to routine rest or mild health issues. At the time, the explanation seemed plausible enough. After all, Catherine had a well-documented history of severe morning sickness during her pregnancies, a condition known as hyperemesis gravidarum, which often required hospital care. The press and the public accepted the narrative, assuming her absences were related to pregnancy difficulties or simply exhaustion. But behind the vague statements was something far more painful: a pregnancy that ended in loss. According to sources close to the situation, the doctor who later confirmed the miscarriage had been directly involved in Catherine's care. This was not idle chatter, but a first-hand account. The physician did not speak out recklessly. Rather, the confirmation came in the context of discussions about royal health and transparency. The fact that such information emerged at all points to the delicate balance between medical confidentiality and the public's right to know when it comes to figures like Catherine. In most circumstances, a woman's miscarriage would remain private, shared only with her family and closest friends. But Catherine was no ordinary woman. She was a future queen, and every aspect of her life, including her body, was treated as a matter of public interest. The palace's handling of the situation adds another layer of complexity. When Catherine suffered the miscarriage, advisors were reportedly divided on whether to make the news public. Some argued that openness could generate sympathy and strengthen the bond between Catherine and the public. Others insisted that acknowledging such a tragedy would damage the monarchy's image of stability and continuity. In the end, secrecy won. The palace chose silence, issuing bland explanations for Catherine's absences and refusing to acknowledge the truth. For them, admitting vulnerability was too risky. But for Catherine, the cost of this decision was immense. She was forced to endure her grief privately, without the validation that comes from public acknowledgement, without the waves of empathy that might have followed. The doctor's revelation also forced many to revisit Catherine's public appearances during the period surrounding the miscarriage. Looking back, some noted subtle signs: her weight loss, the subdued expressions, the rare moments when her usual composure seemed strained. At the time, few connected these dots. Now, with the truth revealed, those moments take on a haunting clarity. They were glimpses of a woman carrying a burden too heavy for words, concealed beneath the demands of royal duty. Every handshake, every smile, every appearance was layered with hidden pain. The revelation reframes these moments, showing Catherine not just as a polished figurehead, but as a human being navigating unimaginable grief while the world watched. The doctor's words also reignited the debate over transparency in the royal family. Should the monarchy be obligated to share such personal truths, given the public role they occupy? Or should they, like any family, be entitled to privacy in moments of tragedy? On one hand, Catherine's miscarriage was deeply personal, a loss that should have remained hers to share or not share. On the other hand, the monarchy has built its legitimacy on the illusion of openness, on the idea that the public is part of their story. Births, weddings, and even illnesses are shared with fanfare or solemnity because they bind the crown to its subjects. By hiding Catherine's miscarriage, the palace disrupted this unspoken contract. They asked the public to invest emotionally in her pregnancies and celebrate the births of her children, yet denied them the truth when tragedy struck. The ethical tension is profound. The doctor's confirmation showed that the secrecy was not about protecting Catherine's privacy, but about protecting the monarchy's image. Catherine herself may have preferred openness. Many women, including public figures like Meghan Markle and Michelle Obama, have spoken about their miscarriages as a way of breaking stigma and connecting with others. Catherine, known for her advocacy on issues of children's well-being and mental health, might have used her experience to highlight the importance of emotional support during such losses. But the palace denied her that choice. The decision was made for her, reducing her to a symbol rather than a person. The revelation also raises questions about the palace's relationship with the truth. If they were willing to hide something as deeply human as a miscarriage, what else might they be concealing? This question has long haunted the monarchy, an institution with a history of burying uncomfortable realities. From the illnesses of kings to the affairs of princes, from the silencing of Diana to the marginalization of Meghan, the Windsors have repeatedly chosen secrecy over honesty. The doctor's revelation about Catherine is not just a story about her. It is a story about the monarchy's obsession with control. It is a reminder that behind the glittering facade lies a machinery designed to conceal vulnerability at any cost. But perhaps the most powerful consequence of the doctor's words is the way they changed public perception of Catherine. Far from diminishing her image, the revelation made her more relatable. For years, she was seen as almost untouchable, a woman whose life seemed charmed, free of the struggles that plague ordinary families. The miscarriage shattered that illusion, but in doing so, it drew her closer to the people she represents. Millions of women have endured miscarriage. Millions know the pain of losing a child before ever holding them. Catherine's experience, once hidden, now connects her to those women in a way her public image never could. It humanizes her, making her not just a princess, but a mother who has known loss. The doctor's confirmation also sparked broader conversations about the role of women in the monarchy. Catherine's silence highlighted the way royal women are treated as vessels of continuity, their worth tied to their ability to produce heirs. The miscarriage exposed the cruelty of this expectation. It showed that behind the crown is a woman whose body and choices are scrutinized, managed, and sometimes silenced for the sake of the institution. The revelation was a reminder that the monarchy, for all its traditions, remains deeply bound to outdated notions of women's roles. Catherine's suffering became a symbol of the need for change, for a monarchy that values humanity over image. In the end, the doctor's revelation was more than a confirmation of fact. It was a disruption of narrative, a challenge to the polished image the palace had spent years cultivating. It forced the world to see Catherine not as an unbreakable icon, but as a woman who has known grief and carried it silently because her role demanded it. It forced us to question the ethics of an institution that prioritizes appearances over empathy. And it opened a conversation about miscarriage, silence, and the human cost of monarchy that cannot easily be ignored. The story of Catherine's miscarriage, as confirmed by her doctor, is not just about loss. It is about revelation. It reveals the hidden realities of royal life, the suffocating pressures of image, and the resilience of a woman forced to carry pain in silence. It is a story that compels us to look beyond the crown and see the humanity beneath. And it is a reminder that even in the most gilded cages, grief cannot be erased. It can only be hidden until the truth finally comes to light. The decision to stay silent about Catherine's miscarriage was not made lightly, nor was it made with compassion at its core. It was the result of cold, calculated discussions behind palace walls, where courtiers, advisors, and senior royals weighed Catherine's personal grief against the survival of the monarchy's public image. The institution has long operated under the principle that what the public doesn't know cannot hurt the crown. Silence has been their shield for centuries. In Catherine's case, it became their weapon, wielded not to protect her, but to protect the brand of royalty itself. When news of the miscarriage reached those in power, immediate discussions reportedly began on how to contain it. The monarchy thrives on symbols, and Catherine had become one of its most powerful. She was the embodiment of continuity, the mother who produced heirs for the future of the crown, the calm balance to William's growing role as heir apparent. To admit that she had lost a pregnancy was to admit fragility, and fragility did not fit the image they had so carefully constructed. Silence was deemed the safest option, even if it meant burying her pain beneath protocol. Advisors argued that the monarchy could not afford to appear unstable. The royal family was already weathering challenges, from Prince Andrew's scandals to the growing tensions with Harry and Meghan. Catherine, in contrast, was their shining light. She was the figure the public trusted most, admired most, and relied upon as proof that the monarchy still held dignity. Any revelation that disrupted that perception was seen as dangerous. It wasn't just about Catherine's grief, it was about the crown's survival. The decision was made. The miscarriage would remain a secret. The mechanisms of secrecy were set in motion swiftly. Official statements explaining Catherine's absences were carefully crafted to avoid suspicion. Words like routine rest, minor health issues, and standard precaution were deployed to cover gaps in her public schedule. The press, used to the palace's evasive language, accepted these explanations at face value. After all, Catherine had experienced serious pregnancy complications in the past. Hyperemesis gravidarum, the severe form of morning sickness that required hospitalization during her earlier pregnancies, was a convenient excuse that could explain nearly any absence. The palace leaned on this history to mask the reality of her miscarriage. Inside the palace, however, the atmosphere was far from stable. For Catherine, the enforced silence created an unbearable burden. Miscarriage is already a profoundly isolating experience. Many women describe the silence that surrounds it as suffocating. To grieve without acknowledgement, to lose a child without ritual, leaves wounds that linger long after the body has healed. For Catherine, the silence was multiplied by the demands of her role. She could not turn to the public for empathy. She could not share her story to normalize the grief. Instead, she was expected to step back into public life with a smile, carrying the weight of a secret no one was allowed to acknowledge. The monarchy's obsession with secrecy is deeply rooted in its history. Queen Elizabeth II, Catherine's grandmother-in-law, reigned for decades under the principle that the crown must never appear vulnerable. She believed that the survival of the monarchy depended on projecting strength, regardless of the human cost. This mindset was passed down to her advisors, who treated personal tragedies as threats to the institution. The abdication of Edward VIII, the scandals of Princess Margaret, the tumultuous marriage of Charles and Diana, each had taught the monarchy that vulnerability could quickly turn into crisis. By the time Catherine joined the royal family, secrecy was already a reflex. Her miscarriage, no matter how personal, was absorbed into this tradition of silence. What makes this silence so cruel is that it robbed Catherine of choice. The decision to speak or not speak should have been hers. Instead, the institution made the decision for her. She became a symbol to be managed, her grief subordinated to the needs of the crown. In silencing her, the monarchy stripped her of agency. They reduced her from a mother mourning a child to a figurehead maintaining an illusion. This is the hidden cruelty of monarchy. The people inside it are not allowed to own their own stories. Their lives are managed, their truths edited, their pain concealed. The secrecy also reveals the monarchy's fear of modern transparency. In today's world, vulnerability is often seen as strength. Public figures who share their struggles, whether with mental health, miscarriage, or personal loss, are often met with empathy and respect. Meghan Markle's openness about her miscarriage, for example, sparked global conversations and drew widespread support. By contrast, the monarchy clung to an outdated belief that silence equals strength. In doing so, they not only denied Catherine her truth, but also missed an opportunity to connect with the public on a profoundly human level. The decision to stay silent also had ripple effects on William. As Catherine's husband, he bore witness to her grief. As the future king, he was part of the institution that silenced her. This dual role placed him in an impossible position. Privately, he grieved alongside her, offering support as a husband. Publicly, he complied with the decision to conceal the truth. For William, the silence was not just about protecting the monarchy. It was about protecting Catherine from the relentless scrutiny that would have followed. He likely believed that silence was a shield. But in practice, it was a cage, trapping her grief within walls she could not escape. The public, of course, remained unaware. They continued to see Catherine as the embodiment of perfection. Photographs of her at public events, radiant and smiling, reinforced the illusion that all was well. Few questioned the palace's vague statements about her health. The press, wary of crossing lines after years of criticism for intruding too far into royal lives, did not dig deeper. The silence held, but it was a fragile silence, one that cracked the moment the doctor confirmed the truth. The revelation years later exposed the palace's decision for what it was, an act of control, not compassion. It showed that the monarchy valued image over empathy, illusion over honesty. And it raised profound questions about the ethics of such secrecy. Should the public have been told? Did the monarchy have a duty to be transparent, given that Catherine's pregnancies had always been matters of public celebration? Or was the miscarriage a private matter that should never have been politicized? The palace's choice to stay silent ensured that Catherine's grief became a tool for the institution, whether she wanted it or not. The silence also reinforced the stigma around miscarriage. By refusing to acknowledge Catherine's loss, the monarchy sent an implicit message. Miscarriage is something to be hidden, something shameful, something unworthy of acknowledgement. This message runs counter to the efforts of countless advocates who have worked to normalize conversations about pregnancy loss. Catherine, had she been allowed to speak, could have been a powerful voice in this movement. Instead, she was silenced, her story locked away to protect an image that no longer resonates with a modern world demanding authenticity. In hindsight, the decision to remain silent seems not only cruel but short-sighted. The monarchy has long struggled with relevance in an age of transparency and accountability. Catherine's openness could have bridged the gap between tradition and modernity, showing that the crown is not an untouchable relic, but a family that experiences the same struggles as those it represents. Instead, by choosing secrecy, the monarchy reinforced the perception that it is out of touch, clinging to illusions of perfection that no longer convince the public. The palace's decision to stay silent about Catherine's miscarriage is a stark reminder of the cost of image management. It reveals an institution so consumed by its survival that it sacrifices the humanity of its members. It shows how Catherine's pain was subordinated to the needs of the crown, how her grief was silenced in the name of stability. And it forces us to confront the question, what kind of institution demands such sacrifices? The answer lies not only in the history of monarchy, but in its present reality. An institution still bound by secrecy, still terrified of vulnerability, still unwilling to show that behind the crown are human beings who bleed, grieve, and suffer like the rest of us. The emotional toll that Catherine endured as a result of her miscarriage is impossible to fully measure. Yet certain truths emerge when we consider the circumstances under which she suffered. Miscarriage in itself is a devastating experience, often described by women as the loss of a dream, the shattering of a bond formed in the earliest weeks of life. It is grief that often goes unseen, because there is no funeral, no memorial, no tangible acknowledgement of what has been lost. For Catherine, this grief was compounded by the fact that her experience was deliberately hidden, stripped of acknowledgement not just by circumstance, but by command. She was not only grieving. She was doing so in enforced silence, surrounded by courtiers and advisors who treated her loss as a threat to be contained rather than a tragedy to be mourned. The isolation Catherine must have felt in those weeks and months after the miscarriage can only be imagined. The role she occupies demands constant visibility and perfection. She is the face of countless engagements, the figure that reassures the public of continuity. Yet, when the most human tragedy struck, she was told she must hide it, suppress it, and continue performing. The emotional burden of carrying on with public duties while her private world crumbled would have required extraordinary strength. To step into the public eye with a smile while mourning a child is not resilience alone. It is endurance born of necessity, a survival mechanism that takes a heavy psychological toll. The image of Princess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has always been carefully curated. polished appearances, warm smiles, and an aura of grace that made her seem untouchable, almost otherworldly. For years, she has been portrayed as the steady hand of the modern monarchy, the perfect wife to the future king, the flawless mother who balances duty with affection. But behind those photographs of glittering gowns and impeccable posture, there was a secret that almost no one outside the royal walls knew. Catherine suffered a miscarriage, a devastating and profoundly human experience, hidden not just from the public, but suppressed deliberately to maintain what the palace calls an image of stability. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The news did not come from a tabloid rumor mill or the whispers of anonymous palace staff. It came from a doctor, someone who had been directly involved in Catherine's health journey, who confirmed what many suspected but could never prove. For the royal family, the revelation is more than a personal tragedy. It is an indictment of a system built on silence, control, and the ruthless suppression of vulnerability. And for Catherine, it raises questions about how much one woman should be forced to sacrifice in the name of monarchy. Imagine enduring one of the most painful experiences of your life, the loss of an unborn child, while also carrying the crushing burden of knowing that the world must never know. Imagine showing up at official events, greeting dignitaries, waving to adoring crowds, all while silently grieving something so intimate, so heartbreaking, that most women rely on their closest support networks to survive it. This is the reality Catherine reportedly faced, and it was not just about her. The palace, terrified of how such news might damage the carefully constructed narrative of continuity and stability, allegedly ordered silence. To them, Catherine was not just a wife or a mother. She was an emblem, a symbol that had to remain unshaken, untarnished, even if it meant burying her pain beneath protocol. And so the story begins, not just with Catherine's miscarriage, but with the chilling reality of what it means to be royal in the 21st century, to live a life that is not your own, where even your grief is managed, edited, and silenced to protect an institution. This introduction will take you inside that story, peeling back the polished facade to show the cost of secrecy, the clash between human suffering and royal image, and the truth about the monarchy's relentless pursuit of perfection, no matter the emotional toll. The truth about Catherine's miscarriage is not simply a revelation about her health. It is a story that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth about the monarchy's culture of silence, the way they have historically hidden personal tragedies, and the human cost that comes with protecting an institution above all else. To understand how shocking this revelation is, one must first understand the image the palace has worked so hard to cultivate. Catherine has long been presented to the world as the ideal consort, serene, unflappable, a woman seemingly untouched by the chaos that often swirled around the royal family. Her public life was carefully managed, her appearances rehearsed to perfection, and every image of her reinforced the idea that she was the perfect partner for William and the stabilizing force for the monarchy. But beneath this curated image was a reality that few were ever allowed to see. The miscarriage is not just a private loss. It is also a lens into the immense pressures Catherine faced as both a wife and mother. Miscarriage is an incredibly common experience. Statistics show that around 1 in 4 pregnancies end this way, yet it is rarely spoken about openly, especially within institutions obsessed with maintaining flawless appearances. For Catherine, the stakes were even higher. Her pregnancies had always been matters of public interest, dissected by the press and monitored by millions. From the moment she married Prince William, the question of children hovered over her like a crown she was expected to wear, regardless of personal challenges. Every pregnancy announcement was a global headline, and every appearance during her childbearing years was analyzed for hints of morning sickness, signs of a bump, or speculation about family expansion. To then suffer a miscarriage under such intense public scrutiny would have been doubly cruel. It was not just the loss of a child, it was the loss of a private right to grieve. Reports suggest that the decision to keep the miscarriage hidden was not Catherine's alone. The palace, operating under its age-old mantra of never complain, never explain, made the call to bury the truth. Advisors feared that acknowledging the loss might shake public confidence, trigger unwanted sympathy, or cast shadows over the narrative of stability the monarchy was desperate to project. After all, Catherine was being positioned as the embodiment of resilience and continuity. How would it look, they thought, if she were suddenly vulnerable in the eyes of the world? To them, the monarchy could not afford to reveal cracks in its carefully polished image. But what does it mean to silence such a deeply human experience? For Catherine, it likely meant bearing her grief privately, without the release of public acknowledgement, without the support that might have flowed from empathetic voices around the globe. Instead, she had to step into public engagements, wave to crowds, and fulfill her duties as if nothing had happened. The sheer emotional strength required to maintain such composure is staggering. Those who have endured miscarriage often describe it as a grief unlike any other, a grief that is invisible to others because there is no funeral, no ritual, no public recognition of the loss. To imagine living through that while the world watches your every move and expects perfection is almost unbearable. The palace's strategy of silence is not unprecedented. Throughout history, the royal family has gone to great lengths to suppress stories of personal tragedy. The illnesses of monarchs, the affairs of heirs, even the struggles of spouses have all been buried under layers of secrecy. Queen Elizabeth herself lived by the principle that the monarchy must always appear steady, never vulnerable. The Windsors have long understood that their survival depends on projecting strength, even when they are crumbling inside. In Catherine's case, the miscarriage was seen as a threat to that narrative. But in hiding it, they revealed something even more damaging, that the institution values image over humanity. The doctor's confirmation shattered the wall of secrecy. It provided the proof that what had long been whispered was in fact true. For many, the revelation was not just about Catherine's pain, but about the injustice of forcing her into silence. It raised questions about the balance between public duty and private suffering. Should a woman be denied the chance to share her grief simply because of her title? Should the loss of a child be deemed too dangerous to the stability of an institution? These are questions that strike at the heart of what it means to be royal in the modern world. The monarchy is no longer a divine institution above reproach. It is a family living in the public eye, subject to scrutiny, empathy, and criticism. And Catherine's hidden miscarriage forces us to ask whether the monarchy has truly evolved or whether it is still enslaved to outdated notions of perfection. There is also the question of William. As Catherine's husband and the future king, he would have been placed in an impossible position. Privately, he was a grieving father. Publicly, he was expected to show strength and composure. For him, the decision to remain silent may have been both a duty and a burden. Sources suggest that William's instinct has always been to protect his wife fiercely, especially after witnessing what his mother endured at the hands of both the media and the monarchy. To be forced into silence while watching Catherine suffer would have been agonizing. And yet, bound by loyalty to the institution, he complied. This tension between personal devotion and royal duty is one of the defining struggles of his life. And Catherine's miscarriage made it all the more apparent. For the public, the truth adds layers to Catherine's story that make her more relatable, not less. In an age where transparency is increasingly valued, where leaders are expected to show vulnerability as much as strength, the revelation could have humanized her in ways the palace failed to anticipate. Meghan Markle's decision to write openly about her miscarriage, for instance, sparked widespread conversation and empathy. Catherine's silence, by contrast, maintained her image but at a significant cost. Had she been allowed to share her story, it might have inspired countless women, offered comfort to those grieving similar losses, and cemented her role not just as a royal, but as a woman of resilience. Instead, it was hidden, only to emerge years later as a symbol of secrecy rather than strength. The tragedy of this revelation is not simply the miscarriage itself, but the denial of Catherine's right to grieve publicly, to find solidarity with millions of women who have walked the same path. Miscarriage is not a weakness, nor does it diminish the worth of the woman who endures it. By suppressing Catherine's loss, the monarchy missed an opportunity to break down stigma, to show the world that even those who seem untouchable face the same human struggles as everyone else. Instead, they clung to silence, reinforcing the outdated belief that pain must be hidden to preserve power. This introduction sets the stage for a story of grief, resilience, secrecy, and revelation. It asks us to look beyond the glittering facade of monarchy and confront the humanity that lies beneath. Catherine's miscarriage is not just a personal tragedy. It is a reminder of the costs of silence, the cruelty of image-driven control, and the enduring strength of a woman forced to carry her pain in private. As we move deeper into the story, we will uncover how this secret was kept, who was involved in silencing it, and what it reveals about the monarchy's priorities in the modern world. For now, what matters most is recognizing the courage it takes to live through such a loss, and the injustice of being denied the chance to grieve openly. Catherine's journey into the heart of the royal family was never just about love or duty. It was about stepping into a role that demanded perfection in every form. Long before she became the Princess of Wales, she was already burdened with the public's expectations. The press nicknamed her Weighty Katie during the years she dated Prince William, mocking her patience and resilience as though her life's worth was measured solely by her eventual acceptance into the monarchy. When the wedding bells finally rang in 2011, the world didn't just celebrate a marriage, it celebrated the presentation of a new icon. One who would embody the future of the British crown. Catherine wasn't just William's wife. She was Britain's promise of stability after years of scandal and decline in royal popularity. This expectation built a powerful, carefully crafted image. Catherine, the graceful figure who could do no wrong, the elegant mother whose family looked like a postcard of domestic bliss, the unshakable woman who would guide the monarchy into modern times. Every photograph reinforced that narrative. Every public appearance was rehearsed to the point of flawlessness. Every smile seemed deliberate, calculated to show warmth without vulnerability. It was an image designed to reassure the public that the monarchy remained strong, united, and free of the dysfunctions that plagued it in the past. But behind this curated persona was a woman under extraordinary pressure, navigating private struggles that no camera would ever capture. The miscarriage cuts directly through this image. To the world, Catherine's motherhood was an uninterrupted string of successes. 3 healthy children, each pregnancy celebrated as a triumph, each birth announced with joy. But the truth of her private pain reveals a story far more complex. Miscarriage is not uncommon, yet it has historically been shrouded in silence, treated as a shameful secret rather than a shared grief. For Catherine, the silence was doubled. First, by the cultural tendency to avoid discussing miscarriage, and second, by the royal family's obsession with projecting stability. In many ways, her private suffering was the very opposite of her public image. Where the world saw perfection, she endured loss. Where the cameras saw strength, she carried fragility. To understand how this contradiction took shape, one must look at how the palace has long managed its women. Royal women are expected to be symbols more than individuals, symbols of continuity, fertility, and grace. Their worth, in the public imagination, is tied to their ability to produce heirs and maintain the mystique of the crown. Catherine, more than any modern royal before her, bore this weight acutely. Unlike Diana, who had moments of rebellion, or Meghan, who openly clashed with the system, Catherine accepted the expectations placed upon her. But that acceptance came at a price. By embodying perfection, she was denied the right to be human in the public eye. The miscarriage reveals the cost of that denial. What does it mean to live a life where even grief is off limits? Catherine's miscarriage was not just a personal tragedy. It was a collision between her humanity and the monarchy's demands. She had to grieve in silence, without the freedom to lean on public support, without the validation that comes from acknowledgement. In her public image, she was required to carry on as though nothing had happened. The carefully crafted photographs of her smiling at events, engaging with charities, and appearing alongside William took on a darker meaning when juxtaposed with the hidden reality of her loss. These images were not evidence of her unshakable strength alone. They were evidence of her imprisonment within a role that demanded denial of pain. It is worth asking how this experience shaped Catherine's private identity. A woman who loses a child often describes it as a fracture in her life's narrative, an unspoken grief that lingers in every moment. For Catherine, that fracture was compounded by the fact that she had to present herself as whole in front of the world. The image of perfection, once a shield, became a prison. She could not admit to the world that she was broken in some way. Instead, she was forced to live two lives: the flawless princess of Wales adored by millions, and the grieving mother silenced by duty. This duality of image and reality is not unique to Catherine, but it is particularly pronounced in her case because of the scale of her visibility. Every tabloid cover, every magazine spread, every television broadcast reinforced the idea of a perfect family, a perfect woman. The palace encouraged this narrative because it suited their goals. After the scandals of Prince Andrew, the controversies surrounding Harry and Meghan, and the lingering wounds from Diana's tragic story, Catherine was their redemption arc. She was the proof that the monarchy could still inspire loyalty and affection. But by placing her on that pedestal, they denied her the freedom to be vulnerable. The miscarriage, hidden from public view, symbolized the greatest contradiction of all. The institution that relies on the humanity of its members refuses to acknowledge that humanity when it does not serve its image. Public image is a fragile thing, built not just on truth, but on perception. Catherine's carefully managed appearances reinforced the perception of her as unbreakable. Yet the revelation of her miscarriage shatters that illusion, revealing that she was as human as any woman who has endured the same pain. The tragedy lies not in the loss alone, but in the secrecy. For while millions of women around the world might have empathized, offered support, and found solace in her openness, Catherine was denied that opportunity. Instead, her grief became another sacrifice on the altar of monarchy. This hidden reality also reveals the cruelty of the monarchy's obsession with control. By keeping Catherine's miscarriage secret, the palace denied the public a chance to see her humanity and denied her the chance to normalize an experience that affects countless women. Imagine the impact if Catherine had spoken about her loss at the time. Imagine the comfort it might have offered to women grieving privately, ashamed to speak of their miscarriages because society still treats them as taboo. Instead, Catherine's silence reinforced the stigma, not because she wanted it to, but because the institution demanded it. Her public image of perfection was preserved, but at what cost? William's role in this dynamic is equally significant. As her husband, he understood her pain. As a future king, he understood the palace's demands. He, too, lived within the contradiction of supporting Catherine privately while maintaining silence publicly. The public image of the united royal couple was as much about performance as reality. They stood side by side at events, the picture of composure, but behind the scenes, they were navigating grief in isolation. For William, protecting Catherine meant more than shielding her from media intrusion. It meant supporting her through a loss that the world would never know. Yet he, too, was trapped by the monarchy's image-first mentality. His silence was not just loyalty to the crown, but also complicity in its cruelty. The wider public might never have guessed at the time. They saw Catherine attending events, smiling for cameras, carrying out her duties. They admired her for her strength, never realizing that strength came not from unshakable perfection, but from the endurance of concealed pain. This is the irony of her public image. The very thing that made her appear flawless was the same thing that concealed her humanity. And now, with the doctor's revelation, the truth adds layers to her story that make her more relatable, not less. Catherine's private struggles did not diminish her, they made her real. They showed that behind the image of perfection was a woman living with the same vulnerabilities as millions of others. The miscarriage was not a weakness, but a testament to her strength. She carried her grief while fulfilling her role, embodying resilience in silence. Yet the tragedy of the palace's control is that this strength was never allowed to be seen for what it was. Instead, it was hidden, turned into another invisible sacrifice for the sake of image. Research shows that women who suffer miscarriage often experience depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. They replay the loss in their minds, questioning what they did wrong, whether it was something they ate, something they did, or something they failed to do. Even though doctors assure them otherwise, the self-blame can be relentless. For Catherine, those feelings would have been magnified by her position. Every decision she made, from the food she ate to the pace of her schedule, was scrutinized by the press. If she privately blamed herself, she would have done so under the crushing weight of knowing millions of people analyzed her every move. The silence around her loss meant she had no outlet to release these thoughts publicly, no opportunity to counter the guilt with the empathy of others who had endured the same. Catherine's public role also created unique emotional contradictions. On the one hand, she was expected to embody motherhood, to present herself as the perfect maternal figure for the nation. On the other hand, when her pregnancy ended in loss, she was expected to erase that chapter from existence, as if it never happened. This dual expectation must have been emotionally suffocating. How does one reconcile being celebrated for producing heirs with being silenced when an heir is lost? The miscarriage would have exposed the fragility of her role. She was valued for her fertility, yet denied acknowledgement of the humanity that accompanies fertility's failures. The toll extended into her marriage as well. William, by all accounts, has always been fiercely protective of Catherine, shaped by the trauma of his mother's death and determined to shield his wife from similar suffering. But the institution they served placed limits on that protection. Together, they grieved in private, but the demand for silence prevented them from drawing on the collective empathy of the public. Grief shared is grief lessened. Grief concealed is grief doubled. For Catherine and William, their shared loss became an isolated struggle, endured in the shadows of palace walls. While William may have been a source of comfort, he too was constrained by the demands of his role. The silence they were forced into likely deepened the weight on their relationship, a bond tested not by their love, but by the institution that governs their lives. One of the cruelest aspects of the emotional toll was the necessity of returning to public life almost immediately. Catherine could not retreat into anonymity to heal. She had to resume royal duties, appear at charity events, and project joy for the cameras. Each handshake and each smile was an act of performance layered over private pain. The contrast between her external image and her internal reality must have been exhausting. This constant dissonance, living two lives simultaneously, can fracture one's sense of self. It forces a woman to compartmentalize her grief, locking it away so deeply that even in her own moments of solitude, she may struggle to access it fully. The emotional toll was not limited to Catherine herself, but rippled into her relationship with her existing children. As a mother, she would have continued caring for George, Charlotte, and Louis, ensuring their lives remained as stable and joyful as possible. Yet behind her efforts would have been the silent weight of knowing there should have been another child, another sibling. Parents who lose pregnancies often describe an enduring sense of absence, a ghostly presence in family life that never fully fades. For Catherine, who values her role as a mother deeply, that absence would have been profound. She may have found joy in her children's milestones, but always with the quiet ache of what might have been. Mental health advocates often emphasize the importance of sharing miscarriage experiences to break the silence and stigma surrounding them. Catherine herself has spoken publicly about the importance of mental well-being, championing initiatives to support children and families. Yet in her own life, she was denied the ability to model this openness. The irony is painful. A woman who has built her public identity around empathy and support for others' struggles was forced to conceal her own. This suppression would not only have hurt her personally, but also clashed with her instincts as an advocate. The emotional toll, then, was not just grief. It was the frustration of knowing she could have used her experience to help others, but was prevented from doing so. The silence also robbed her of solidarity. Miscarriage is often lessened by the recognition that others share the pain. Women who speak openly about it frequently describe the comfort of hearing "me too" from friends, family, or even strangers. That recognition affirms that the loss, while painful, is not borne alone. Catherine, however, could not access that communal healing. Her silence isolated her from the millions of women who might have embraced her story. Instead of solidarity, she faced solitude. Instead of empathy, she endured invisibility. It is important to understand that grief does not simply fade with time. It lingers, reappearing in unexpected ways. A child's birthday may trigger it. An offhand comment may stir it. Even a moment of joy may be shadowed by the memory of loss. For Catherine, the unacknowledged miscarriage would have lingered in the quiet spaces of her life, resurfacing in moments when she least expected it. The emotional toll was not confined to the days or weeks after the event. It stretched into the years that followed, a hidden wound carried beneath the polished exterior of royalty. The public's later discovery of the miscarriage added another emotional dimension: betrayal. For Catherine, the revelation confirmed what she already knew, that her truth had been stolen from her and hidden by others. The doctor's confirmation may have brought validation, but it also reopened old wounds. To have her grief revealed not by her own choice, but by someone else's words meant losing control over her story twice. Once when the palace silenced her, and again when the secret emerged without her consent. This lack of agency compounds trauma. Grief is already about loss. To also lose control over the narrative of that grief deepens the pain. The emotional toll of Catherine's miscarriage, then, was multifaceted. It was the immediate grief of losing a child. It was the isolation of being silenced. It was the exhaustion of performing joy while carrying sorrow. It was the frustration of being denied the chance to use her experience for good. It was the solitude of missing solidarity, the quiet ache of absence in family life, and the betrayal of losing control over her story. Each layer compounded the others, creating a burden that few could bear, yet one Catherine endured with the dignity and composure the world has come to expect from her. And yet, within this toll lies evidence of her resilience. To carry on under such circumstances, to continue serving, smiling, and giving, reveals a strength that goes beyond the facade of perfection the palace insists upon. Catherine's emotional toll is also a testament to her endurance. It shows that behind the flawless image is a woman of extraordinary resolve, capable of enduring silence and secrecy while still embodying grace. The revelation of her miscarriage does not diminish her image, it enhances it. It reveals the depth of her humanity and the magnitude of her strength. The emotional toll on Catherine is perhaps the most powerful reminder of the cruelty of enforced silence. It shows us that monarchy, in its obsession with image, often inflicts wounds on its own members. It reminds us that beneath the crowns and gowns are human beings carrying grief just like anyone else. And it compels us to see Catherine not just as a princess, but as a woman whose private suffering was compounded by public demands, whose grief was real, and whose resilience deserves acknowledgement. William's role in the aftermath of Catherine's miscarriage was layered with contradictions, responsibilities, and emotional weight that no husband, let alone a future king, should be expected to bear. His public persona is one of steadiness, calm authority, and a kind of quiet strength that contrasts with the turbulence of his brother's public journey. But beneath the surface, he was confronted with a crisis that tested not only his marriage but his ability to reconcile personal devotion with institutional duty. Catherine's loss was not just hers, it was his as well. He, too, was a grieving parent, mourning the child they had hoped for, the future they had momentarily imagined. Yet while grieving, he was also forced into the role of protector, mediator, and reluctant enforcer of the palace's decision to remain silent. At the heart of William's struggle was the tension between husband and heir. As Catherine's husband, his instinct would have been to prioritize her emotional well-being, to grieve openly with her, to allow her the space to process their loss. As the heir to the throne, however, he was surrounded by advisors reminding him of the larger picture, warning him of the potential fallout should the truth become public. William has long been known for his desire to modernize the monarchy, but he is also deeply loyal to the institution and to the example of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II. In this case, loyalty meant compliance. By acquiescing to the decision to stay silent, he became both Catherine's closest ally and, unintentionally, part of the machinery that denied her voice. The personal grief William endured cannot be underestimated. Fathers are often overlooked in the conversation around miscarriage, yet they, too, experience profound loss. For William, who has often spoken of how central fatherhood is to his identity, the miscarriage would have been devastating. He has described his children as his greatest joy, anchors in a life otherwise consumed by duty and scrutiny. To lose a child before birth would have left a scar on his heart, a lingering "what if" that no title or crown could erase. Unlike Catherine, William did not have to appear before the cameras with the same frequency during that period, but the weight of his grief was compounded by his responsibility to hold their family together. Those close to William have often remarked on his protective nature, born from his childhood trauma of losing his mother. Diana's death left him fiercely determined to shield his family from the same destructive forces that hounded her. Catherine has benefited from this instinct. He has gone to great lengths to ensure her privacy, to create as normal a life as possible for their children. But the miscarriage tested his protective resolve in new ways. He could not shield Catherine from the grief itself, nor from the silence imposed by the monarchy. His protective instincts were undermined by the very institution he was destined to lead. The toll this must have taken on him personally is hard to overstate. To see his wife suffer, to know she longed for acknowledgement, and yet to stand by as others dictated silence must have been excruciating. William's role also involved the delicate task of balancing the needs of his wife with the demands of the crown. He could not retreat into private mourning indefinitely. The monarchy expects visibility, and both he and Catherine were required to resume their duties quickly. For William, this meant stepping back into public life while privately managing his own grief and Catherine's fragile emotional state. The strength required to perform this balancing act is enormous. Every handshake, every speech, every engagement would have carried the invisible weight of loss. Yet he carried on, because duty demanded it. Behind the scenes, William's influence was likely critical in ensuring that Catherine had at least some space to heal. Those who know him describe a man who prioritizes family above all else, even above the crown when he feels it necessary. His insistence on creating time for their family, retreating to Amer Hall, or spending extended periods in Norfolk, reflects his determination to carve out privacy within the relentless public gaze. During the period after the miscarriage, these retreats may have been Catherine's only refuge, places where grief could be expressed without cameras, advisors, or institutional scrutiny. William, in creating those moments of sanctuary, gave her what the monarchy would not: the freedom to grieve as a woman, not a princess. Still, William's position within the monarchy meant he could not fully escape complicity in the decision to stay silent. While he may have disagreed privately, his ultimate choice to follow the palace's guidance reinforced the culture of secrecy. For Catherine, this could have been a source of both comfort and conflict. Comfort, because William's silence aligned with hers, creating a united front. Conflict, because the silence was not her choice, and William's agreement with it might have felt like betrayal. Such contradictions are the reality of life within the monarchy. Personal relationships are filtered through the lens of duty, and love is often compromised by loyalty to the institution. William's response to Catherine's miscarriage is a reflection of this duality, both deeply human in his grief and deeply bound by the constraints of monarchy. The miscarriage also likely shaped William's understanding of the fragility of his family's public image. As a man who has witnessed firsthand the destructive power of public scrutiny, through his mother's torment, his brother's battles, and his own lifelong exposure, he knows better than most how damaging vulnerability can appear in the public eye. Yet he also knows how important authenticity has become in modern leadership. The revelation of Catherine's miscarriage years later may have reinforced for him the need for greater openness, even if he was not able to act on that instinct at the time. The experience highlighted the ongoing struggle he faces as heir, how to honor tradition while also responding to the demands of a changing world. William's role in this tragedy also offers insight into his character as a husband. His devotion to Catherine has always been clear, but the miscarriage tested the depth of that devotion. To grieve alongside her, to support her through silence, and to carry the weight of secrecy with her demonstrates a resilience in their marriage that is often overlooked. The monarchy has a long history of fractured unions, of spouses divided by the pressures of duty. William and Catherine, however, have shown a united front through adversity. Their shared endurance of the miscarriage, even in silence, is evidence of a partnership built not just on love, but on shared sacrifice. For the public, learning of William's role in this chapter of their lives reshapes perceptions of him as well. He has often been portrayed as stoic, sometimes distant, a man defined by responsibility more than emotion. The revelation of Catherine's miscarriage, and his role in supporting her, reveals a more vulnerable side. It shows that behind the heir to the throne is a husband and father who has known loss, who has carried grief, and who has chosen silence not because he wanted it, but because he believed it was necessary. This humanizes him in ways the monarchy has long resisted, making him not just a future king, but a man who has endured pain like any other. Ultimately, William's role and response to Catherine's miscarriage highlight the central paradox of royal life, the collision of personal humanity with institutional duty. As a husband, he grieved. As a father, he mourned. As a man, he wanted to protect his wife. But as heir to the throne, he complied with a decision that denied her voice, denied their grief acknowledgement, and placed the monarchy's image above their humanity. This paradox defines much of William's life, but in the case of the miscarriage, it was particularly cruel. His response was shaped by love, loyalty, and loss, but also by the chains of duty he could not break. The miscarriage left a permanent mark on William's life. It reminded him of the fragility of happiness, the weight of silence, and the sacrifices demanded by the crown. It revealed the strength of his marriage, the depth of his devotion, and the limitations of his role. And it showed the world that even those destined to wear a crown cannot escape the grief of losing a child. William's response to Catherine's miscarriage is not just part of her story. It is part of his, a chapter of sorrow and silence that reshaped the man who will one day be king. The royal family has long lived by a guiding principle. The preservation of the crown must come before everything else. From the days of monarchs who waged wars to secure their throne, to the modern age of televised coronations and constant media scrutiny, the monarchy has always been more about the image it projects than the humanity of those inside it. This image first tradition has been both its greatest strength and its deepest weakness. It allows the crown to endure scandal, crisis, and change, but it also strips its members of their ability to be vulnerable. Catherine's miscarriage, hidden behind palace walls, is not an anomaly. It is the continuation of a centuries-old pattern of silencing personal tragedies to maintain the illusion of stability. To understand this tradition, one must look back at history. Monarchs have always been judged not just by their decisions, but by their ability to appear unshaken. In the days when kings were warriors, any sign of weakness could lead to rebellion or conquest. In the age of constitutional monarchy, the stakes are different, but no less serious. The royal family no longer rules, but it survives on public consent. The image of continuity, stability, and strength is what keeps the institution alive. If the public begins to see the monarchy as fragile or fractured, its very existence could be called into question. This is why secrecy has been so deeply ingrained in its culture. Queen Elizabeth II embodied this ethos for her entire reign. Her famous mantra, "Never complain, never explain," was more than just a saying, it was a survival strategy. She believed that the monarchy's power came from its distance, from the ability to project an image of serenity and control regardless of the chaos swirling around it. This meant hiding illnesses, disguising marital troubles, and silencing scandals. When the queen was hospitalized, the palace often released only the barest of statements, never revealing more than necessary. When members of the family faltered, their struggles were managed quietly, away from public view whenever possible. Vulnerability was never permitted to overshadow the image of strength. Catherine's miscarriage was absorbed into this tradition. To the courtiers and advisors steeped in decades of this ethos, the decision to stay silent was not cruelty, it was protocol. A miscarriage, in their eyes, was not just a private tragedy. It was a potential narrative that could disrupt the carefully curated image of the monarchy. Catherine had been positioned as the symbol of the crown's future, the perfect wife and mother who embodied stability. To admit her loss would have disrupted that image. Better, they thought, to hide it. Better to present her as unshakable, continuing her duties without pause, than to acknowledge that she was, like everyone else, vulnerable to life's cruelties. This obsession with image has led the monarchy to silence other tragedies in the past. Princess Margaret's struggles with mental health and relationships were carefully hidden until the tabloids unearthed them. The institutional cruelty toward Diana, ignoring her cries for help, dismissing her struggles with bulimia and depression, was rooted in the same philosophy. The public image of a happy, united family mattered more than the reality. Even Prince Philip's health scares were often minimized until they could no longer be denied. The monarchy has always chosen silence, believing it's safer to hide pain than to risk appearing weak. The irony is that this tradition has often backfired. Diana's openness about her struggles made her beloved, while the monarchy's silence made it appear cold and unfeeling. Meghan Markle's decision to speak about her miscarriage earned her empathy around the world, while the palace's continued secrecy reinforced its reputation for being out of touch. In hiding Catherine's miscarriage, the royal family repeated the same mistake. They assumed that silence would protect them, but in reality, it robbed them of an opportunity to show their humanity, to connect with the public on the most universal of experiences, grief. The image-first tradition is also tied to the monarchy's view of women. For centuries, royal women have been valued primarily for their ability to produce heirs. Fertility has been central to their worth. Queens who failed to bear sons were often vilified, their personal tragedies treated as failures of state. Catherine, in the modern era, inherited this burden. Her pregnancies were celebrated not just as family milestones, but as matters of national importance. Every birth announcement was a symbol of continuity, every child a reassurance of stability. Within this framework, a miscarriage was not just a private loss. It was, in the palace's calculation, a disruption to the narrative of fertility and success. Hiding it was seen as protecting her image as the perfect mother, but in truth, it was another example of reducing a woman to her symbolic role. The cost of this tradition is immense. For Catherine, it meant being denied the right to grieve openly. For William, it meant being forced into silence when he might have wanted to speak. For the monarchy, it meant clinging to an outdated notion of strength that alienates the very people they hope to inspire. In today's world, authenticity and vulnerability are valued. Leaders who admit to struggles are often admired, not diminished. By refusing to adapt, the monarchy risks looking increasingly irrelevant, trapped in a past where silence was strength but now reads as coldness. The image-first tradition also raises questions about trust. The public invests emotionally in the monarchy, celebrating its milestones and mourning its losses. When the monarchy hides the truth, it betrays that trust. People were asked to rejoice at Catherine's pregnancies, to celebrate her children's births, to treat her family as symbols of hope. Yet when tragedy struck, they were excluded from the story. The revelation of her miscarriage years later left many feeling misled, as though their emotional investment had been manipulated. This erosion of trust is one of the dangers of prioritizing image over truth. Once the illusion cracks, it becomes harder to maintain. Catherine's miscarriage also highlights the generational tension within the royal family. William and Catherine are often seen as the modern face of the monarchy, more open and approachable than their predecessors. Yet even they were pulled into the orbit of tradition, forced to comply with the image-first ethos that has dominated for decades. The silence around Catherine's loss suggests that the monarchy is still unwilling to evolve fully, still clinging to practices that no longer resonate with the public. This tension will define William's reign. If he continues the tradition of silence, he risks alienating future generations. If he chooses transparency, he risks breaking with the institution's deeply ingrained habits. Catherine's miscarriage, though hidden, may ultimately influence how William navigates this balance in the years to come. The persistence of the image-first tradition reflects the monarchy's fear of vulnerability. Yet it is precisely vulnerability that makes leaders relatable. Catherine's loss could have been a moment of connection, a chance to show that the woman who will one day be queen is also a human being who has known grief. Instead, the monarchy chose to maintain the illusion of perfection. In doing so, they denied Catherine the chance to share her truth, denied the public the chance to empathize, and reinforced a culture of silence that has caused so much damage in the past. Ultimately, the royal family's decision to prioritize image over truth in Catherine's case is a stark reminder of the institution's limitations. It shows that for all its pageantry and tradition, the monarchy is still trapped by its own fear of appearing human. It reveals that behind the crowns and ceremonies lies an institution willing to sacrifice the emotional well-being of its members to preserve an illusion. And it forces us to ask whether an institution that values image over humanity can truly endure in a world that demands authenticity. Catherine's miscarriage is more than a personal tragedy. It is a reflection of the monarchy's enduring philosophy. It is a story of how a deeply human experience was erased to maintain an illusion, how grief was silenced in the name of stability, how a woman's pain was subordinated to an institution's survival. The image first, tradition may have protected the crown in the short term, but in the long term, it reveals the very fragility it seeks to conceal. By silencing Catherine's loss, the monarchy did not project strength. It exposed its fear of vulnerability. And in the modern world, that fear may be its greatest weakness. When Catherine quietly disappeared from the public eye during the time of her miscarriage, the absence did not go unnoticed. The media, ever hungry for royal stories, began speculating almost immediately. In the world of royal reporting, even a missed engagement or an unexplained gap in appearances becomes fodder for countless theories. Tabloids in particular thrive on filling the silence left by the palace, spinning narratives that often range from mildly plausible to wildly conspiratorial. At the time, most of the speculation revolved around her health, but few, if any, guessed the truth, that she had suffered a miscarriage the palace refused to acknowledge. The press had been conditioned by years of palace language to expect vague explanations. Catherine had already established a history of pregnancy complications, particularly her struggle with hyperemesis gravidarum. This rare and severe form of morning sickness had landed her in hospital during her earlier pregnancies, and it became a convenient excuse for the palace to deploy whenever her schedule required adjustments. When Catherine suddenly canceled or postponed appearances, the official line would reference health precautions or minor complications. Journalists, accustomed to this pattern, assumed any gap in her public presence meant she was once again suffering from severe sickness. This narrative was accepted without much scrutiny, precisely because it had been true before. But whispers began to circulate. Some reporters noted that Catherine seemed more fragile in certain appearances following her absence. Her face looked drawn, her expressions more subdued. In photos, there was a weariness in her eyes that contrasted sharply with her usual composure. Still, without confirmation, these observations remained speculation. Editors hesitated to print theories that could backfire if proven false. The monarchy's influence over the press, though diminished from decades past, remained significant enough to discourage reckless reporting. So the story of her miscarriage remained hidden, buried under a pile of speculation that never quite reached the truth. Media speculation during that period illustrates the dynamic between the press and the palace. Reporters know that the monarchy thrives on controlling the narrative, but they also know that secrets often lurk behind official statements. Some journalists did question the repeated absences, asking whether there was more to Catherine's health than the palace admitted. But without evidence, these questions never made it to front pages. The risk of overstepping, of offending public sympathy for Catherine, was too great. The British press, burned by criticism of its treatment of Diana and wary of being seen as heartless toward Catherine, erred on the side of restraint. That restraint, ironically, protected the palace's secrecy. Social media, however, told a different story. Unlike traditional outlets, platforms like Twitter and online forums were not bound by editorial caution. Ordinary people speculated freely about Catherine's health, some suggesting stress, others wondering about marital strain, still others floating conspiracies about her pregnancies. In hindsight, some of these theories, while misguided, were attempts to explain the unexplained. Catherine's absence had left a void, and people rushed to fill it with their own narratives. A miscarriage was rarely mentioned, perhaps because the possibility seemed too intimate, too painful, too taboo to be attached to the image of a future queen. Looking back, certain headlines and articles take on new meaning. Pieces that described Catherine's mystery health struggles or her bravery in the face of complications were closer to the truth than anyone realized. The coverage, while not accurate in detail, revealed the unease that surrounded her absences. Journalists sensed that something more significant was happening but lacked the confirmation to state it outright. Their restraint preserved the monarchy's secret, but it also allowed speculation to fester. Some critics argue that this was precisely what the palace wanted, to let the press speculate harmlessly while ensuring the painful truth remained hidden. For Catherine, the speculation must have been its own kind of torment. Imagine grieving a miscarriage while seeing newspapers dissect your appearance, your demeanor, your schedule. Imagine knowing that people were whispering about your health, spinning stories about your private life, and yet being unable to share the truth that might explain it all. This kind of public speculation adds another layer of emotional burden to an already crushing loss. Silence, in this case, did not protect her. It magnified the loneliness of her grief. The doctor's eventual confirmation of the miscarriage forced the media to revisit their past reporting. Journalists pored over old photographs, old headlines, old notes, piecing together the timeline with fresh eyes. Suddenly, the mystery absences and the uncharacteristic weariness made sense. Retrospective articles appeared, some apologetic in tone, acknowledging that the press had unknowingly reported around a tragedy. Others were more critical, accusing the palace of manipulating the media by withholding the truth. The revelation changed the way journalists viewed their relationship with the monarchy, reinforcing the belief that official statements could never be taken at face value. It also reignited a debate about privacy and public interest. Was the media wrong to speculate at all? Should they have respected the palace's statements without question? Or was their job precisely to push deeper, to challenge the official narrative and uncover the truth? Many journalists defended their restraint, arguing that to have guessed at a miscarriage without proof would have been unethical and invasive. Others suggested that the palace's manipulation placed the press in an impossible position, forcing them to either look complicit in silence or risk being accused of cruelty. The public's reaction to the revelation was shaped in part by their memory of the speculation at the time. Many people expressed shock, not because Catherine had suffered a miscarriage, that experience is heartbreakingly common, but because it had been hidden so effectively. They remembered the gaps in her schedule, the vague palace statements, and the sympathetic but incomplete coverage. To learn, years later, that the truth had been deliberately withheld left some feeling betrayed. They felt they had been denied the chance to offer their support, denied the chance to see Catherine as a woman enduring the same struggles so many families face. The press, too, felt this frustration, recognizing that the secrecy had not only silenced Catherine, but also robbed the public of an opportunity for connection. The media speculation around Catherine's absence also highlights the changing role of journalism in the age of social media. In earlier decades, the press would have been the only source of speculation. Today, with online platforms, the monarchy can no longer control the narrative as effectively. Rumors spread faster, theories take root quickly, and secrecy is harder to maintain. The fact that Catherine's miscarriage remained hidden as long as it did is a testament to the palace's grip on traditional outlets. But it also underscores how much has changed. Had the story broken in today's media climate with the same intensity as Meghan's revelations, it might not have been possible to contain it. For Catherine, the media speculation was both a curse and a shield. On one hand, it intruded on her life during a period of deep vulnerability, subjecting her to constant scrutiny. On the other hand, the speculation remained vague enough to protect her from the raw exposure of the truth. But this protection came at the cost of validation. The press covered her health struggles sympathetically, but without the acknowledgement of miscarriage, the empathy remained incomplete. The stories framed her as brave for enduring sickness, but they could not capture the depth of bravery required to endure loss. The speculation also shaped the narrative of Catherine's public image. At the time, she was portrayed as resilient, quietly persevering through complications. This portrayal reinforced the image the palace wanted: Catherine as steady, reliable, unshaken. Yet in hindsight, the truth reveals that this portrayal was both accurate and incomplete. She was resilient, but not because of sickness. She was resilient because she endured a miscarriage in silence, because she carried on with grace while mourning in private. The media speculation captured her strength but missed the source of it. In the end, the media's role in Catherine's miscarriage story is a reflection of the delicate dance between the press and the monarchy. The palace controls access, and the press relies on that access to survive. This dynamic encourages compliance, discouraging journalists from pushing too hard without proof. But it also leaves them complicit in the monarchy's secrecy, reporting around truths they cannot confirm. The speculation around Catherine's health during her miscarriage is one of the clearest examples of this dance. The press sensed a story but could not break it. The palace exploited their restraint, and Catherine bore the cost of their silence. Now, with the truth revealed, the speculation of the past reads like a tragic footnote. The headlines that once seemed routine now carry a haunting resonance. The photographs once admired now reveal pain hidden behind smiles. The journalists who once praised her bravery now recognize they were praising a facade necessitated by secrecy. The speculation, incomplete as it was, became part of the story, a reminder of how the monarchy's silence warped public understanding. It shows how easily an institution can manipulate perception when image is prioritized over truth, and how the media, for all its reach, can sometimes serve as an unwitting accomplice. The silence surrounding Catherine's miscarriage was not a neutral act. It was not simply a matter of privacy, nor was it merely a strategic choice to protect the monarchy's image. It came with a profound human cost. Every decision to hide the truth rippled through Catherine's life, William's life, their children's world, and even the public's relationship with the monarchy. When grief is silenced, it does not vanish, it festers. When pain is denied acknowledgement, it grows heavier, pressing on the spirit until it shapes the way a person carries themselves. The human cost of the palace's silence was borne most heavily by Catherine, but it also spread outward, affecting everyone touched by her story. The first and most direct cost was Catherine's emotional well-being. Miscarriage is one of the most isolating forms of grief. Unlike other losses, it often comes with no public recognition, no shared rituals, no tangible memories of the child to hold on to. For many women, the silence of miscarriage is already deafening. For Catherine, that silence was imposed upon her deliberately by the monarchy. She was not only denied the chance to share her grief publicly, but was forced to perform normalcy in its place. The cost of that performance was immense. Every handshake, every smile, every carefully composed appearance required her to bury her sorrow deeper. Instead of grieving openly, she carried her pain as a hidden burden. Over time, that kind of suppression can take a toll on mental health, leading to anxiety, depression, or emotional exhaustion. The silence also cost her a chance at solidarity. Women who experience miscarriage often describe the comfort of discovering how many others have walked the same path. Support groups, candid conversations, and even public figures sharing their stories can lift the weight of isolation. Had Catherine been able to speak, she would have been met with a chorus of empathy. She would have joined a community of women who could say, "I know what you're going through." Instead, she was denied that solidarity. The secrecy kept her separate from the very people who might have offered the most comfort. It reinforced the stigma that miscarriage is something to hide, something shameful, something best left unspoken. That stigma, in turn, only deepened her isolation. The silence had a cost within her marriage as well. Catherine and William's bond has been described as one of deep partnership, built on years of friendship and loyalty. But even the strongest marriages are tested by grief, and the enforced secrecy must have added new strains. For William, the pressure to comply with palace decisions placed him in the position of both supporter and enforcer. He grieved alongside his wife, yet also carried the weight of maintaining silence for the sake of the crown. This dynamic, though born of loyalty, could easily have created moments of tension. Catherine may have felt, at times, that her husband's duty to the monarchy conflicted with her need for acknowledgement. William, in turn, may have struggled with guilt, knowing he could not fully protect her from the burden of enforced secrecy. The cost to their marriage was not irreparable, but it was real. Grief that could not be shared openly, pain that had to be hidden, love tested by silence. The children, though too young to understand at the time, were also indirectly affected. George, Charlotte, and Louis would eventually grow up with knowledge of the sibling they never knew. In family life, miscarriages often cast a quiet shadow. Parents carry the memory of the child who might have been, and that memory shapes the way they view their existing children. It can deepen gratitude, but it can also deepen sorrow. For Catherine, every milestone her children reached may have carried the quiet ache of the child who was absent. The silence around the miscarriage meant that even within their family, the loss may not have been given the acknowledgement it deserved. This lack of acknowledgement is another layer of cost, an absence that lingers silently in family life. The human cost also extended to Catherine's public role. She has built much of her identity around causes that support families, children, and mental health. Her advocacy has always been marked by empathy and authenticity. Yet in this case, she was denied the ability to live out the values she so publicly champions. The miscarriage could have been an opportunity to advance the conversation about maternal health and pregnancy loss. Catherine, had she been allowed to share her story, might have transformed her grief into advocacy that would help countless others. Instead, she was silenced. The cost of that silence was not only personal but societal. The loss of a powerful voice in the fight to destigmatize miscarriage. For the public, the silence carried its own consequences. The monarchy thrives on the emotional investment of its people. Births, weddings, and jubilees are shared with great fanfare because they bind the public to the institution. Yet, by hiding Catherine's miscarriage, the monarchy denied the public the chance to grieve with her, to share in her vulnerability, to connect with her humanity. Instead of deepening the bond between monarch and subject, the silence created distance. When the truth finally emerged, many felt betrayed, as though their trust had been manipulated. They had been asked to celebrate Catherine's pregnancies, but were not told of her loss. This asymmetry in storytelling, sharing joy while hiding sorrow, undermined the authenticity of the monarchy's relationship with the public. The cost here was credibility, a fragile commodity in an era where authenticity is increasingly demanded. The silence also reinforced the monarchy's reputation for coldness. After Diana's death, the royal family was widely criticized for appearing distant and unemotional, failing to acknowledge the nation's grief. The lesson of that crisis was supposedly that the monarchy needed to show more empathy, more humanity. Yet in Catherine's case, the institution repeated the same mistake. By hiding her miscarriage, they prioritized image over compassion. The public may have admired Catherine's apparent resilience, but once the truth was known, admiration was mixed with frustration. The monarchy had once again chosen secrecy over sincerity, reinforcing the perception that it is incapable of genuine openness. The human cost, then, was not only personal to Catherine but collective, deepening the divide between the institution and the people it serves. The silence had another cost. It perpetuated the monarchy's outdated view of women. Catherine's role as a royal woman has always been tied to her ability to bear children. Her pregnancies were national events, her children symbols of continuity. By silencing her miscarriage, the monarchy reinforced the idea that her value lay only in her successes as a mother, not in her humanity as a woman. Loss was treated as a flaw to be hidden rather than an experience to be honored. This dehumanizing perspective not only harmed Catherine, but also perpetuated the stigma that women should endure miscarriage quietly, without acknowledgement. The cost here was cultural as well as personal, reinforcing harmful expectations that extend far beyond the palace walls. The cost of silence is also evident in the way it reshaped Catherine's legacy. For years, she was seen as flawless, unshaken, always composed. But the revelation of her miscarriage shattered that illusion, revealing a deeper story. While this ultimately humanized her, the delay in sharing it meant that the public's understanding of her was incomplete for years. Her strength was admired, but its true source was hidden. This concealment distorted her narrative, robbing her of the recognition she deserved for enduring such pain with grace. The human cost, then, was not only in the moment but in the shaping of her story, a story that could have inspired earlier, could have connected more deeply, had it been told truthfully. Even the monarchy itself bore a cost from the silence, though it may not admit it. By hiding the truth, it lost an opportunity to demonstrate empathy, to modernize its approach, to show that it is capable of vulnerability. Instead, it entrenched its reputation for secrecy, alienated parts of the public, and reinforced perceptions of irrelevance. The institution may have believed that silence protected it, but in reality, the silence only exposed its fear of vulnerability. In an age where people value authenticity above perfection, the monarchy's silence revealed its inability to adapt. That inability is itself a cost, one that could haunt the institution as it struggles to remain relevant in the decades to come. In the end, the human cost of silence is written in the quiet suffering of Catherine, the strained loyalty of William, the betrayed trust of the public, and the reinforced stigma that harms women everywhere. It is a cost paid in isolation, in missed opportunities, in distorted narratives. It is a cost borne not only by individuals, but by society itself, which loses the chance to learn, to empathize, to grow. Silence, the palace believed, was safety. But in truth, silence was cruelty. It magnified grief, deepened isolation, and perpetuated harm. The story of Catherine's miscarriage is not just about loss. It is about the cost of denying that loss, the pain inflicted by an institution that values image over humanity. When the truth of Catherine's miscarriage emerged, it did more than expose a hidden chapter of her life. It ignited debates among experts in medicine, psychology, media ethics, and royal commentary about what the monarchy should have done. At the center of this debate was the question of transparency. Should the royal family have spoken openly about Catherine's loss? Would transparency have helped the public understand, or would it have exposed her to unwelcome scrutiny? The answers varied. But what was clear is that silence came at a cost, and experts from different fields have weighed in on how things could have been different. Medical professionals were among the first to speak about the importance of openness in cases of miscarriage. Doctors often emphasize that miscarriage is not rare. Statistics suggest that 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss. Yet the subject remains taboo, hidden in whispers and cloaked in shame. By acknowledging Catherine's miscarriage, the monarchy could have helped normalize a conversation that affects millions of families every year. One obstetrician pointed out that when public figures share their experiences, it not only comforts those who have endured similar losses, but also educates society at large about the need for compassion. Catherine's silence, imposed by the palace, deprived the public of a chance to see that miscarriage is not a weakness or failure, but a common part of human experience. Psychologists echoed this point, stressing the emotional benefits of speaking openly about loss. Miscarriage, they explained, often leads to feelings of isolation because society tends to treat it as invisible grief. Unlike other forms of bereavement, it does not come with rituals of mourning or widespread acknowledgement. For Catherine, whose grief was not only hidden but deliberately suppressed, the psychological impact would have been intensified. Transparency, experts argued, might have helped alleviate that burden. By sharing her story, she could have connected with millions of women who have suffered in silence, creating a sense of solidarity. Instead, she was left to grieve behind palace walls, while the public narrative of her life continued as though nothing had happened. Mental health advocates were particularly critical of the monarchy's silence. Catherine herself has championed mental health awareness, especially among children and families. She has spoken about the importance of breaking stigmas and offering support to those who struggle. To silence her own grief, then, was seen by many as a contradiction. Advocates argued that had she been allowed to share her experience, she could have been a powerful force in dismantling the stigma around miscarriage. Her story could have validated countless women who feel ashamed or silenced by their loss. Instead, the monarchy's decision reinforced the very culture of silence Catherine has sought to challenge in her public work. Media ethicists offered another perspective, pointing out the double standard in how the monarchy manages information. The public is invited to celebrate royal births with great fanfare, to invest emotionally in every stage of pregnancy, from the announcement to the first photographs outside the hospital. This emotional investment builds loyalty to the crown, reinforcing its place in public life. But when tragedy strikes, the public is excluded. Ethicists argued that this selective transparency is manipulative, asking people to share in the joy but not the sorrow. By withholding Catherine's miscarriage, the monarchy treated the public not as partners in its story, but as spectators fed only the narratives that served the institution. In doing so, it undermined trust. Royal commentators added historical context, noting that the monarchy has long hidden personal tragedies. The illnesses of George VI, the marital struggles of Princess Margaret, the mental health issues faced by royal relatives, these were all concealed until secrecy became impossible. Catherine's miscarriage, they argued, was absorbed into this same tradition of silence. But unlike in the past, today's world is less tolerant of secrecy. The public demands authenticity, and when it is denied, it feels deceived. Experts on monarchy suggested that by clinging to outdated notions of strength, the palace missed an opportunity to modernize. Catherine's openness could have been a defining moment for the monarchy, a chance to show it is capable of vulnerability in a way that connects with the public. Instead, it chose silence, reinforcing its image as cold and out of touch. There were also voices who defended the palace's decision, though they were fewer. Some argued that Catherine was entitled to privacy, that miscarriage is a profoundly personal matter that no woman should feel compelled to share. Transparency, they warned, could have exposed her to cruel scrutiny, invasive questions, and media sensationalism. The monarchy has always been wary of giving the press too much to feed on, and in this case, silence may have been seen as a form of protection. But even those who defended the decision acknowledged that the silence was not entirely about Catherine's privacy. It was about the monarchy's image. Had the decision been hers alone, they suggested, she may have chosen differently. The debate among experts highlights the complex balance between privacy and public duty. Catherine's position complicates the issue in ways that do not apply to ordinary women. She is both an individual and a symbol, both a mother and a princess. Her pregnancies are not just personal milestones, but matters of state interest. This dual role creates ethical challenges. Should she be allowed the privacy any woman deserves, or does her symbolic role demand a higher level of transparency? The palace answered by prioritizing the institution. Experts, however, largely agree that the decision denied Catherine the agency to choose for herself. In examining the question of transparency, comparisons to Meghan Markle were inevitable. Meghan's decision to write openly about her miscarriage was praised by health professionals and advocates alike. Her story broke through the stigma, sparking conversations around the world. It showed that vulnerability can be met with compassion rather than condemnation. Many experts contrasted this with Catherine's enforced silence, noting how different the outcomes were. Meghan's transparency brought her empathy, while Catherine's secrecy brought her isolation. The contrast underscored how damaging the monarchy's insistence on silence can be, not only to its members, but to the broader public conversation. The question of transparency also extended to the monarchy itself. Some constitutional scholars noted that the crown is funded by the public and exists only with the public's consent. In that sense, they argued, the monarchy has a duty to be more transparent than an ordinary family. While Catherine's miscarriage was personal, the public had already been made part of her pregnancies, encouraged to celebrate them as national events. To exclude them from the story of her loss, therefore, was seen as dishonest. Transparency, in this view, was not just about Catherine. It was about maintaining the integrity of the monarchy's relationship with the people. Other experts raised concerns about the long-term impact of secrecy. By hiding Catherine's miscarriage, the monarchy reinforced its pattern of controlling narratives at all costs. This control may work in the short term, but in the long term it erodes trust. When the truth inevitably emerges, the public feels deceived, and the institution's credibility is damaged. Experts warned that the monarchy cannot afford to continue operating in this way if it wants to survive in an age of instant information and constant scrutiny. Transparency is no longer optional, it is essential. Catherine's miscarriage, they argued, could have been a moment of adaptation, a step toward a more honest monarchy. Instead, it became another example of outdated secrecy. Perhaps the most poignant expert opinions came from women who had experienced miscarriage themselves. They spoke of the comfort that comes from public acknowledgement, the relief of hearing that even those in the highest positions are not immune to such loss. They described the way silence compounds grief, turning it into something heavier than it needs to be. These voices emphasized that Catherine's story, had it been shared, could have provided hope and healing to countless women. Instead, the enforced silence perpetuated isolation, both for her and for those who might have drawn strength from her openness. In the end, the consensus among experts was clear. Transparency would have done more good than harm. It would have helped Catherine, helped the public, and helped the monarchy itself. The decision to stay silent may have protected the image of stability in the short term, but it came at the cost of authenticity, empathy, and trust. By silencing Catherine's grief, the monarchy missed a chance to evolve. Expert voices serve as a reminder that institutions cannot thrive forever on secrecy. In a modern world, honesty is strength and silence is weakness. The debate over transparency is not just an academic exercise. It has real consequences for Catherine, for William, for their children, and for the monarchy as a whole. It raises questions about whether the crown can adapt to the demands of authenticity in the 21st century. And it forces us to consider what kind of institution denies its most beloved figure the chance to share her truth. Catherine's miscarriage, viewed through the lens of expert opinion, becomes more than a story of personal loss. It becomes a case study in the dangers of secrecy, the importance of transparency, and the cost of placing image above humanity. When discussing Catherine's miscarriage and the palace's decision to conceal it, comparisons to other royals become inevitable. The British monarchy is steeped in history, and many of its members have endured personal tragedies, hidden or revealed, that shaped public perception. Examining how Catherine's situation aligns with or diverges from those of other royals sheds light on the institution's long-standing patterns of secrecy, its evolving relationship with the public, and the human consequences of its choices. The most immediate comparison is to Meghan Markle, whose openness about her own miscarriage stands in stark contrast to Catherine's silence. Meghan chose to write candidly about her experience, describing the moment she realized she had lost her child and the profound grief that followed. Her essay was raw and emotional, breaking through centuries of silence surrounding royal women and their reproductive struggles. For this, she was met with both compassion and criticism. Supporters praised her courage and empathy, while detractors accused her of exploiting personal tragedy for attention. Whatever one's view, Meghan's choice sparked global conversations about miscarriage, mental health, and the importance of breaking stigma. Catherine, by contrast, was denied the opportunity to make such a choice. Her silence was not voluntary, but imposed by the palace. The result was that her grief remained hidden, while Meghan's was acknowledged and discussed worldwide. This divergence highlights the difference between agency and control, between sharing a story on one's own terms and having it silenced by others. Princess Diana provides another important comparison. Diana's struggles were not miscarriages, but battles with mental health, eating disorders, and marital breakdown. For years, the palace tried to silence her pain, insisting she maintain the image of a perfect princess. But Diana eventually broke through that silence, speaking candidly in interviews and secretly collaborating on a biography that revealed her anguish. The public's reaction was overwhelming. Far from diminishing her, her honesty made her beloved. People saw in her vulnerability a reflection of their own struggles. Catherine's situation echoes Diana's in that both women were pressured to hide their suffering. The difference is that Diana eventually chose transparency, while Catherine's truth was buried until others revealed it for her. Both cases, however, reveal the monarchy's instinct to prioritize image over humanity. Earlier still, we find comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II. As monarch, she embodied the principle of never revealing vulnerability. When she experienced personal tragedies, such as the death of her father or the collapse of her children's marriages, she maintained a stoic exterior. Illnesses were downplayed, emotions concealed, and personal difficulties reframed as minor inconveniences. Elizabeth's life was a masterclass in the art of silence. But this silence came at a cost. Critics often accused her of being emotionally detached, unable to connect with her subjects in moments of shared grief. After Diana's death, this perception nearly caused a crisis for the monarchy. Elizabeth eventually adapted, showing more openness, but her reign was defined by restraint. Catherine's miscarriage, hidden in similar fashion, fits into this legacy of stoicism. But unlike Elizabeth, Catherine belongs to a generation where silence is no longer seen as strength. The world has changed, and what once preserved the monarchy now risks undermining it. Other comparisons come from further back in history. Royal women have long been judged by their ability to produce heirs. And Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife, famously suffered miscarriages that were used against her, contributing to her downfall and eventual execution. Queen Anne, who reigned in the early 18th century, endured a staggering 17 pregnancies, most of which ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant death. Her personal tragedies were whispered about, but never fully acknowledged in her time. These women were defined by their fertility, and their failures were treated as personal and political catastrophes. Catherine's miscarriage, though hidden, is part of this same historical pattern. The reduction of royal women to their reproductive roles, their successes celebrated and their losses buried. Comparisons can also be drawn to royals outside Britain. In modern monarchies across Europe, transparency has become more common. Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, for example, has spoken openly about her struggles with mental health following her sister's death. Crown Princess Mary of Denmark has acknowledged the difficulties of balancing motherhood with royal duty. These moments of openness have not weakened their monarchies. Instead, they have strengthened their connection with the public. By contrast, the British monarchy's insistence on secrecy makes it appear antiquated, clinging to an outdated model that no longer resonates in today's world. Catherine's hidden miscarriage is a stark example of how far behind the British crown lags in adapting to modern expectations of authenticity. There is also the comparison to other public figures outside royalty. Michelle Obama, for example, spoke openly about her miscarriage, describing it as a lonely and devastating experience that made her feel like she had failed. Her candor was praised, and it resonated with millions of women. Chrissy Teigen shared her pregnancy loss with heartbreaking photographs, sparking both empathy and controversy, but ultimately breaking through societal silence. These figures, by choosing transparency, transformed personal grief into communal conversation. Catherine, had she been allowed, could have done the same. Instead, her story was hidden, leaving her isolated and denying the public a chance to connect with her humanity. Even within her own family, Catherine's experience stands out in contrast. Princess, and known for her bluntness, has always been more pragmatic about personal struggles. While she has not faced publicized miscarriages, her no-nonsense approach has often led her to push back against the palace's obsession with image. Meghan, as mentioned, chose transparency despite the risks. Diana fought to reclaim her voice. Catherine, however, remains the dutiful figure, silenced by loyalty. Her miscarriage reveals not just her personal tragedy, but the persistence of an institutional culture that has failed to evolve, even as those around her have embraced openness. Comparisons also extend to the men of the royal family. Prince Philip, for instance, was famous for his stoicism, rarely speaking about personal pain. Prince Charles, by contrast, has occasionally revealed glimpses of vulnerability, though often criticized for doing so. William himself has spoken about the trauma of losing his mother, admitting that it shaped him deeply. These moments of male openness are more accepted because they are rare. For women like Catherine, however, openness remains fraught, tied to expectations of perfection. The comparison underscores the gendered nature of royal secrecy. Men may occasionally reveal vulnerability without consequence, while women are expected to remain flawless symbols of continuity. Ultimately, the comparisons make clear that Catherine's miscarriage is not an isolated event but part of a broader pattern. The monarchy has always hidden vulnerability, particularly when it involves women and reproduction. From historical queens judged by their fertility to modern princesses silenced by advisors, the story is the same. Personal tragedy subordinated to institutional image. Yet the world around the monarchy has changed. Other royals, other public figures, and even Catherine's own relatives have embraced transparency with positive results. By forcing silence, the palace placed Catherine not in line with the modern world, but in line with a past that no longer fits. The comparisons also highlight the missed opportunity. Catherine's openness could have aligned her with Diana's legacy of compassion, Meghan's candor, and modern leaders' authenticity. It could have shown the monarchy evolving, capable of vulnerability without crumbling. Instead, by hiding her miscarriage, the palace ensured that Catherine remained a symbol rather than a human being in the eyes of the public. The cost of this choice becomes even clearer when viewed against the backdrop of others who have chosen differently. Their openness has inspired, connected, and healed. Catherine's silence, by contrast, left her isolated and denied the public the chance to see her true strength. Comparisons to other royals and public figures, then, do more than illuminate Catherine's story. They reveal the monarchy's enduring fear of vulnerability, its outdated obsession with image, and its failure to adapt to modern expectations. They show that while others have used tragedy to foster empathy, the British Crown still clings to secrecy. And they remind us that Catherine's miscarriage, though hidden, is part of a much larger story. The struggle between tradition and transparency, between image and humanity, between a past defined by silence and a future that demands truth. The revelation of Catherine's miscarriage, confirmed years later by a doctor, triggered a wave of public reaction that quickly grew into backlash against the monarchy. For many people, the shock was not simply that she had endured such a loss. Miscarriage is, tragically, a common experience that countless families can relate to. The outrage was rooted in the realization that the truth had been deliberately concealed, that the public had been misled by vague statements and reassured with half-truths, and that Catherine herself had been denied the dignity of acknowledging her grief. This backlash was fueled by empathy for her and frustration with an institution that once again appeared more concerned with protecting its image than showing compassion. Social media amplified the reaction almost immediately. Hashtags began trending, with people across the world expressing both sorrow for Catherine and anger at the palace. Women who had experienced miscarriage themselves shared their own stories online, often with raw emotion, noting that they would have stood in solidarity with her had they known. Many described how isolating miscarriage can feel and how powerful it would have been to know that even the future queen had faced the same heartbreak. The revelation, years too late, felt like a betrayal. Not just of Catherine, but of the millions who might have drawn strength from her openness. The backlash was as much about what was denied to the public as it was about the silence forced on Catherine. Other experts raised concerns about the long-term impact of secrecy. By hiding Catherine's miscarriage, the monarchy reinforced its pattern of controlling narratives at all costs. This control may work in the short term, but in the long term it erodes trust. When the truth inevitably emerges, the public feels deceived, and the institution's credibility is damaged. Experts warned that the monarchy cannot afford to continue operating in this way if it wants to survive in an age of instant information and constant scrutiny. Transparency is no longer optional, it is essential. Catherine's miscarriage, they argued, could have been a moment of adaptation, a step toward a more honest monarchy. Instead, it became another example of outdated secrecy. Perhaps the most poignant expert opinions came from women who had experienced miscarriage themselves. They spoke of the comfort that comes from public acknowledgement, the relief of hearing that even those in the highest positions are not immune to such loss. They described the way silence compounds grief, turning it into something heavier than it needs to be. These voices emphasized that Catherine's story, had it been shared, could have provided hope and healing to countless women. Instead, the enforced silence perpetuated isolation, both for her and for those who might have drawn strength from her openness. In the end, the consensus among experts was clear. Transparency would have done more good than harm. It would have helped Catherine, helped the public, and helped the monarchy itself. The decision to stay silent may have protected the image of stability in the short term, but it came at the cost of authenticity, empathy, and trust. By silencing Catherine's grief, the monarchy missed a chance to evolve. Expert voices serve as a reminder that institutions cannot thrive forever on secrecy. In a modern world, honesty is strength, and silence is weakness. The debate over transparency is not just an academic exercise. It has real consequences for Catherine, for William, for their children, and for the monarchy as a whole. It raises questions about whether the crown can adapt to the demands of authenticity in the 21st century. And it forces us to consider what kind of institution denies its most beloved figure the chance to share her truth. Catherine's miscarriage, viewed through the lens of expert opinion, becomes more than a story of personal loss. It becomes a case study in the dangers of secrecy, the importance of transparency, and the cost of placing image above humanity. When discussing Catherine's miscarriage and the palace's decision to conceal it, comparisons to other royals become inevitable. The British monarchy is steeped in history, and many of its members have endured personal tragedies, hidden or revealed, that shaped public perception. Examining how Catherine's situation aligns with or diverges from those of other royals sheds light on the institution's long-standing patterns of secrecy, its evolving relationship with the public, and the human consequences of its choices. The most immediate comparison is to Meghan Markle, whose openness about her own miscarriage stands in stark contrast to Catherine's silence. Meghan chose to write candidly about her experience, describing the moment she realized she had lost her child and the profound grief that followed. Her essay was raw and emotional, breaking through centuries of silence surrounding royal women and their reproductive struggles. For this, she was met with both compassion and criticism. Supporters praised her courage and empathy, while detractors accused her of exploiting personal tragedy for attention. Whatever one's view, Meghan's choice sparked global conversations about miscarriage, mental health, and the importance of breaking stigma. Catherine, by contrast, was denied the opportunity to make such a choice. Her silence was not voluntary, but imposed by the palace. The result was that her grief remained hidden, while Meghan's was acknowledged and discussed worldwide. This divergence highlights the difference between agency and control, between sharing a story on one's own terms and having it silenced by others. Princess Diana provides another important comparison. Diana's struggles were not miscarriages but battles with mental health, eating disorders, and marital breakdown. For years, the palace tried to silence her pain, insisting she maintain the image of a perfect princess. But Diana eventually broke through that silence, speaking candidly in interviews and secretly collaborating on a biography that revealed her anguish. The public's reaction was overwhelming. Far from diminishing her, her honesty made her beloved. People saw in her vulnerability a reflection of their own struggles. Catherine's situation echoes Diana's in that both women were pressured to hide their suffering. The difference is that Diana eventually chose transparency, while Catherine's truth was buried until others revealed it for her. Both cases, however, reveal the monarchy's instinct to prioritize image over humanity. Earlier still, we find comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II. As monarch, she embodied the principle of never revealing vulnerability. When she experienced personal tragedies, such as the death of her father or the collapse of her children's marriages, she maintained a stoic exterior. Illnesses were downplayed, emotions concealed, and personal difficulties reframed as minor inconveniences. Elizabeth's life was a masterclass in the art of silence. But this silence came at a cost. Critics often accused her of being emotionally detached, unable to connect with her subjects in moments of shared grief. After Diana's death, this perception nearly caused a crisis for the monarchy. Elizabeth eventually adapted, showing more openness, but her reign was defined by restraint. Catherine's miscarriage, hidden in similar fashion, fits into this legacy of stoicism. But unlike Elizabeth, Catherine belongs to a generation where silence is no longer seen as strength. The world has changed, and what once preserved the monarchy now risks undermining it. Other comparisons come from further back in history. Royal women have long been judged by their ability to produce heirs. And Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife, famously suffered miscarriages that were used against her, contributing to her downfall and eventual execution. Queen Anne, who reigned in the early 18th century, endured a staggering 17 pregnancies, most of which ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant death. Her personal tragedies were whispered about, but never fully acknowledged in her time. These women were defined by their fertility, and their failures were treated as personal and political catastrophes. Catherine's miscarriage, though hidden, is part of this same historical pattern. The reduction of royal women to their reproductive roles, their successes celebrated and their losses buried. Comparisons can also be drawn to royals outside Britain. In modern monarchies across Europe, transparency has become more common. Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, for example, has spoken openly about her struggles with mental health following her sister's death. Crown Princess Mary of Denmark has acknowledged the difficulties of balancing motherhood with royal duty. These moments of openness have not weakened their monarchies. Instead, they have strengthened their connection with the public. By contrast, the British monarchy's insistence on secrecy makes it appear antiquated, clinging to an outdated model that no longer resonates in today's world. Catherine's hidden miscarriage is a stark example of how far behind the British Crown lags in adapting to modern expectations of authenticity. There is also the comparison to other public figures outside royalty. Michelle Obama, for example, spoke openly about her miscarriage, describing it as a lonely and devastating experience that made her feel like she had failed. Her candor was praised, and it resonated with millions of women. Chrissy Teigen shared her pregnancy loss with heartbreaking photographs, sparking both empathy and controversy, but ultimately breaking through societal silence. These figures, by choosing transparency, transformed personal grief into communal conversation. Catherine, had she been allowed, could have done the same. Instead, her story was hidden, leaving her isolated and denying the public a chance to connect with her humanity. Even within her own family, Catherine's experience stands out in contrast. Princess, and known for her bluntness, has always been more pragmatic about personal struggles. While she has not faced publicized miscarriages, her no-nonsense approach has often led her to push back against the palace's obsession with image. Meghan, as mentioned, chose transparency despite the risks. Diana fought to reclaim her voice. Catherine, however, remains the dutiful figure, silenced by loyalty. Her miscarriage reveals not just her personal tragedy, but the persistence of an institutional culture that has failed to evolve, even as those around her have embraced openness. Comparisons also extend to the men of the royal family. Prince Philip, for instance, was famous for his stoicism, rarely speaking about personal pain. Prince Charles, by contrast, has occasionally revealed glimpses of vulnerability, though often criticized for doing so. William himself has spoken about the trauma of losing his mother, admitting that it shaped him deeply. These moments of male openness are more accepted because they are rare. For women like Catherine, however, openness remains fraught, tied to expectations of perfection. The comparison underscores the gendered nature of royal secrecy. Men may occasionally reveal vulnerability without consequence, while women are expected to remain flawless symbols of continuity. Ultimately, the comparisons make clear that Catherine's miscarriage is not an isolated event but part of a broader pattern. The monarchy has always hidden vulnerability, particularly when it involves women and reproduction. From historical queens judged by their fertility to modern princesses silenced by advisors, the story is the same. Personal tragedy subordinated to institutional image. Yet the world around the monarchy has changed. Other royals, other public figures, and even Catherine's own relatives have embraced transparency with positive results. By forcing silence, the palace placed Catherine not in line with the modern world, but in line with a past that no longer fits. The comparisons also highlight the missed opportunity. Catherine's openness could have aligned her with Diana's legacy of compassion, Meghan's candor, and modern leaders' authenticity. It could have shown the monarchy evolving, capable of vulnerability without crumbling. Instead, by hiding her miscarriage, the palace ensured that Catherine remained a symbol rather than a human being in the eyes of the public. The cost of this choice becomes even clearer when viewed against the backdrop of others who have chosen differently. Their openness has inspired, connected, and healed. Catherine's silence, by contrast, left her isolated and denied the public the chance to see her true strength. Comparisons to other royals and public figures, then, do more than illuminate Catherine's story. They reveal the monarchy's enduring fear of vulnerability, its outdated obsession with image, and its failure to adapt to modern expectations. They show that while others have used tragedy to foster empathy, the British crown still clings to secrecy. And they remind us that Catherine's miscarriage, though hidden, is part of a much larger story. The struggle between tradition and transparency, between image and humanity, between a past defined by silence and a future that demands truth. The revelation of Catherine's miscarriage, confirmed years later by a doctor, triggered a wave of public reaction that quickly grew into backlash against the monarchy. For many people, the shock was not simply that she had endured such a loss. Miscarriage is, tragically, a common experience that countless families can relate to. The outrage was rooted in the realization that the truth had been deliberately concealed, that the public had been misled by vague statements and reassured with half-truths, and that Catherine herself had been denied the dignity of acknowledging her grief. This backlash was fueled by empathy for her and frustration with an institution that once again appeared more concerned with protecting its image than showing compassion. Social media amplified the reaction almost immediately. Hashtags began trending, with people across the world expressing both sorrow for Catherine and anger at the palace. Women who had experienced miscarriage themselves shared their own stories online, often with raw emotion, noting that they would have stood in solidarity with her had they known. Many described how isolating miscarriage can feel and how powerful it would have been to know that even the future queen had faced the same heartbreak. The revelation, years too late, felt like a betrayal. Not just of Catherine, but of the millions who might have drawn strength from her openness. The backlash was as much about what was denied to the public as it was about the silence forced on Catherine.